Shinano, the giant aircraft carrier that sank in 17 hours. She was a monster of steel. The largest aircraft carrier ever built at the time. So secret that even many officers in Japan's own navy had never laid eyes on her. She was meant to be the weapon that would help reverse Japan's collapse in the Pacific. A floating fortress. A final symbol of imperial power. A warship designed not just to fight but to restore hope to a crumbling empire. Her name was Shinano. But less than 2 weeks after entering service, she was gone. In the darkness of the Pacific, a single American submarine found her, stalked her, and struck. By the following morning, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy had rolled beneath the waves, becoming the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine. How could a ship of that size vanish so quickly? To understand the sinking of Shinano, we have to return to the final phase of the Pacific War. When Japan was losing, desperately, and time was running out. By late 1944, the Japanese Empire was reeling. Its once feared navy had been battered by years of relentless American attacks. The disaster at Midway in 1942 had shattered the heart of Japan's carrier force, wiping out 4 frontline carriers in a single battle. Since then, defeat had followed defeat. American industry was overwhelming the Pacific with ships, aircraft, and men at a pace Japan could not match. Japan needed a miracle. What it had instead was an unfinished giant. Shinano had not originally been designed as an aircraft carrier at all. She began life as the third ship of the mighty Yamato-class battleships, the most heavily armed battleships ever conceived. But after Midway, Japan's naval doctrine changed overnight. Battleships no longer seemed enough. Aircraft carriers had become the true rulers of the sea. So, while still under construction, Shinano's hull was converted into a carrier. The result was enormous. Stretching roughly the length of 3 football fields and displacing around 71,000 tons, Shinano was unlike any carrier built before her. She was heavily armored, intended not as a conventional fleet carrier, but as a kind of floating support fortress, a protected airbase that could carry aircraft, spare planes, fuel, and supplies for other carriers in battle. She had a projected speed of around 27 knots, a long operational range, and room for a large air group and reserve aircraft. On paper, she looked formidable. But Shinano carried a fatal weakness from the very beginning: she was not ready. In the rush to finish her, compromises had been made. Her armor protection had been altered. Compartments were incomplete. Some watertight doors were unfinished. Bulkheads had openings left unsealed for cables and piping. Damage control systems were not fully operational. Her crew was inexperienced, and many of the shipyard workers who had built her were still on board, continuing construction as the ship prepared to sail. Shinano looked powerful from the outside. Inside, she was still a work in progress. On November 19, 1944, Shinano was officially commissioned at the Yokosuka Naval Shipyard. There were flags, music, and celebration. At last, Japan's newest giant had joined the fleet. But the ceremony was overshadowed almost immediately. An American B-29 reconnaissance aircraft appeared overhead and photographed the ship, capturing one of the very few wartime images ever taken of Shinano. The sight of an American plane over Yokosuka sent alarm through the Japanese high command. If the Americans knew where Shinano was, an air raid could follow. The Navy decided it could not risk leaving the ship in port. Orders were issued. Shinano was to sail immediately to the naval base at Kure, where she would continue outfitting under safer conditions. There was just one problem. Captain Toshio Abe, the man placed in command of Shinano, knew the ship was not ready for sea. Abe was not a reckless officer. He understood what he had been given: an unfinished supercarrier, manned by an undertrained crew, with incomplete systems and vulnerable internal compartments. He protested. He warned that the ship still had serious deficiencies. But Japan, cornered and desperate, could not afford delay. Shinano had become more than a ship, she was a symbol. And symbols were not allowed to wait. So Abe obeyed. On the evening of November 28, 1944, Shinano slipped away from Yokosuka under escort. 3 destroyers accompanied her, isokais, ukikais, and hamakais. On board the carrier were roughly 2,500 people, officers, sailors, shipyard workers, and civilian technicians. Welders and electricians were still working below decks as the ship moved out to sea. Even her cargo reflected Japan's desperation. Shinano carried special attack craft and kamikaze weapons intended for future operations. She was not sailing into battle, but she was carrying the tools of a nation preparing for its final, brutal defense. Captain Abe would have preferred to sail by day, when visibility was better and training could continue. But without reliable air cover, a daylight transit risked attack from American aircraft. He was forced to make the journey at night. Shinano entered Tokyo Bay and turned southward, heading for Korea. Because several boilers were still offline, she could not make full speed. Instead of 27 knots, she moved at roughly 20 knots. Still, the trip was expected to take only around 16 hours. If all went well, Shinano would be safely in Korea by the next day. But in the waters off Japan, another ship was already hunting. The American submarine USS Archerfish, commanded by Commander Joseph Enright, had surfaced after dusk on patrol. Enright was an officer with something to prove. Earlier in the war, he had doubted his own judgment after missing a chance to attack a Japanese carrier and had even stepped away from command. Now he had returned, determined not to fail again. At 8:50 p.m., Archerfish's radar detected something large in the distance. Very large. At first, Enright thought it might be a tanker with escorts. But as the silhouette sharpened under the moonlight, the truth became clear. This was no tanker. This was a massive warship, an aircraft carrier unlike anything he had ever seen. Enright made a bold decision. He would shadow the target. To keep up with a fast warship, Archerfish had to remain on the surface, where submarines were faster than when submerged. It was a risky move. Radar emissions and maneuvering could reveal his presence. But if he lost contact, the opportunity would be gone. On board Shinano, Captain Abe's crew detected the radar pings almost immediately. Abe was concerned, but not yet alarmed. A single submarine, he believed, was not enough to threaten a ship as large as Shinano. He feared something else more, that the submarine might be bait, trying to lure his escorts away while a pack of American subs waited nearby. When one of the destroyers moved to investigate, Abe ordered it back. He would keep his formation intact. Then he changed course. Shinano began zigzagging and maneuvering, hoping to shake the shadowing submarine. For a time, it seemed to work. Archerfish struggled to maintain contact. Enright watched his target drift out of visual range and had to rely on judgment, instinct, and patience. Memories of past failure returned. Once again, he risked losing a carrier. Then fortune intervened. One of Shinano's propeller shafts began to overheat, forcing the giant carrier to reduce speed to around 18 knots, almost exactly the top surface speed Archerfish could manage. What had been a fading chase suddenly became possible again. Later that night, believing he had left danger behind, Captain Abe altered course once more. In doing so, he unknowingly brought Shinano back toward Archerfish's path. Enright seized the chance. He maneuvered ahead of the carrier and prepared for an underwater attack. At 3:05 a.m., Archerfish dived and slipped beneath the surface. Enright brought the submarine into firing position, leveling it at about 60 feet. He gave a crucial order: set the torpedoes to run shallow, just 10 feet beneath the surface. To some of the crew, it seemed odd. But Enright had a reason. A carrier's vulnerability was not necessarily deep below the hull. A hit just under the waterline, beneath the massive weight of the flight deck, could produce catastrophic flooding and destabilization. He also knew the unreliable Mark 14 torpedoes often ran deeper than their set depth. A shallow setting might put them exactly where they needed to be. Aboard Shinano, the radar ping suddenly stopped. Silence. Captain Abe understood the meaning at once. The submarine had submerged. An attack was imminent. In a frantic attempt to evade, Abe ordered another course change. It was the worst possible move. By turning as he did, Shinano exposed her broadside to Archerfish. At 3:13 a.m., with the range now under 2 miles, Archerfish slipped through the destroyer screen. One escort passed so close overhead that its prop wash violently shook the submarine. But the destroyer's sonar was not functioning properly, and it moved on without detecting the American boat below. Enright raised the periscope one last time. There, filling the lens, was Shinano. He gave the order. Fire. One torpedo left the tube. Then another. Then another. In total, Archerfish launched 6 torpedoes, spaced seconds apart. Enright kept his eye on the periscope. Then came the flashes. Torpedoes slammed into Shinano's starboard side. The giant carrier shuddered. Metal groaned. Alarms screamed across the ship. Captain Abe felt the impacts immediately. At first, it did not seem fatal. Shinano was huge, armored, and designed to absorb punishment. In theory, 4 torpedo hits should not have been enough to sink a vessel of her size. But theory was not the same as reality. The torpedoes had struck high, near the waterline, exactly where Shinano was vulnerable. One ripped open a fuel tank and refrigeration spaces. Another devastated an engine room. Another tore through a fire room, killing the men inside and allowing water to flood neighboring compartments. Yet another disabled part of the damage control system itself. And then Shinano's greatest weakness revealed itself. She was unfinished. Watertight integrity had not been fully secured. Openings remained unsealed. Compartments that should have contained flooding allowed water to spread. Damage control teams worked desperately, but the ship's internal systems were incomplete, the crew insufficiently trained, and confusion spread rapidly below decks. Within an hour, the list to starboard was becoming serious. Captain Abe ordered every possible measure to save the ship. Counter-flooding was attempted. Pumps were engaged. Crews fought to isolate the flooding. Men struggled through dark passageways filling with water, steam, and panic. Civilians and laborers crowded passageways, many unable to understand shouted commands. Still Abe refused to give up. He decided to try to reach shallow water near shore, where Shinano might be beached and saved. Engines were kept running to drive the ship forward. But that decision carried a cruel cost. At speed, seawater rushed more violently through the torn hull, flooding the ship even faster. By 6 a.m., Shinano's list had worsened dramatically. The portside seawater intakes began to rise above the surface, reducing the ship's ability to counterflood effectively. Freshwater systems failed. Boilers began shutting down. Speed dropped. The destroyers tried to help. Tow lines were passed in a desperate attempt to pull the carrier toward safety. But Shinano was simply too massive, too heavy, and too far gone. The cables snapped under the strain. As dawn spread across the Pacific, the truth became harder to deny. Japan's greatest carrier was dying. Hours passed. Compartment after compartment filled with water. Men gathered on the flight deck as the list increased. Some still hoped the ship could be saved. Others knew it was over. At around 8 a.m., another desperate effort was made, flooding parts of the port side to reduce the list. For a short time, it seemed to help. But the sea was winning. More systems failed. More compartments were lost. More men climbed upward toward open air. By 10 a.m., the flight deck was crowded with survivors clinging to rails and structures as the angle of the ship grew more severe. Water climbed higher and higher along the island. Captain Abe stood on the bridge and faced the moment every captain dreads. Unable to bring himself to say the words "abandon ship," he instead told his men, "You are all released from duty. Save yourselves." Less than 12 hours after Archerfish's torpedo struck, Shinano's fate was sealed. At 10:55 a.m. on November 29, 1944, the 71,000-ton carrier rolled heavily to starboard and slipped beneath the sea. Air trapped inside the hull burst outward as the giant disappeared, creating violent suction that dragged men down with her. Captain Abe remained aboard with senior officers, choosing to go down with the ship. In the water, survivors struggled among wreckage, oil, and exhaustion. But even then, tragedy continued. Rescue efforts were harsh and incomplete. Of the roughly 2,500 people aboard Shinano when she departed, more than 1,400 died. Meanwhile, USS Archerfish was already slipping away into the Pacific, intact and undetected. When Enright later reported sinking a giant Japanese carrier, many American officers were skeptical. Intelligence doubted such a ship had even been present. But Enright had made sketches during the pursuit, and intercepted Japanese communications soon confirmed the truth. The ship he had sunk was Shinano, the largest aircraft carrier in the world at the time, and the largest warship ever sunk by a submarine. For Enright, the attack became one of the most successful submarine patrols of the war by tonnage destroyed. For Japan, the loss was a devastating blow not only militarily, but psychologically. Shinano had been intended as a secret answer to defeat, a symbol that the empire still had power left to unleash. Instead, she became a symbol of something else. Of haste. Of overconfidence. Of a system so pressured by war that it sent an unfinished giant. To sea and hope size alone would save her. In truth, Archerfish's torpedoes did not destroy a fully prepared warship. They struck a vessel that had been rushed into service before she was ready, before her watertight compartments were sealed, before her systems were complete, before her crew was trained to fight for her survival. The torpedoes were deadly, yes. But what sank Shinano was the combination of enemy skill and internal weakness. Steel alone was not enough. Armor alone was not enough. A ship can be vast, powerful, and terrifying on paper. But if its foundations are compromised, if its construction is rushed, if its flaws are ignored, if those in command are forced to move before they are ready, then even the largest warship in the world can be undone by a few hits in the right place. And that is why Shinano still matters. Because her story is not just about a carrier lost in wartime. It is about what happens when desperation overtakes preparation. When appearances matter more than readiness. When leadership is forced to gamble with unfinished work because there is no time left for caution. Shinano never launched a major strike. She never fought the kind of fleet battle she had been built to support. She entered service as a legend and vanished almost immediately into history. A giant, born too late. A fortress, sent out unfinished. A symbol of empire, swallowed by the sea before she could ever truly serve. And in the darkness of that November night, one submarine proved a brutal lesson of naval warfare: no ship is unsinkable, no matter how large, if the cracks beneath the surface are already there. Shinano did not simply sink. She warned.